ghouls and wraiths, howls and screams. These are the bones of Felstad. One wizard's cottage stands seemingly occupied in the ruined city. Who is inside? Are they friends or demonic foe? Hi, I'm Maddie, and today we're building a little fantasy house. In the coming weeks, my partner Naomi and I are going to be starting a Frostgrave campaign, and we need some terrain. This little medieval / Tudor / fantasy house is going to be the first of hopefully many more that will populate the table. It's my first time using snow effects, and there are some pretty bad disasters with aerosol and oil paints, but before I get into that, let's get to planning. I knew I wanted to avoid having an MDF base, but the structure still needed something durable to fix the walls to. I settled on XPS foam in a simple, almost square cut. This first building will only be 1 story tall at the walls, but with the pointed roof it goes up 2 stories for a maximum height of 13 centimeters plus 3 centimeters for the foam base. I planned 2 stone textures on the base, one larger for the cornerstones and smaller ones for the infill, which take up the majority of the space. I really wanted to try 3D printing a resin door and window frames. For the Tudor style paneling, I had some suitably sized craft sticks on hand. For the roof, I decided on plastic card as it will hold its shape mostly, and corrugated cardboard strips will look like tiling. There was going to be a lot of new things on here for me, so I made a test piece as well. Here is the first test piece and the first disaster. I was really keen to create some contrast between the square cornerstones and the infill, and after spending a lot of time looking at British churches on YouTube, I decided to go for the rounder riverstone look. I also tried to incorporate more mortar around the stones to match what I'd seen in the photos, but I got the scale all wrong. Also, the colours were a total mess, and overall it just took forever. When I went in again, I drew the cornerstones the same way by tracing around a cut piece of foam core, but for the infill I stamped in a brick-like pattern using the end of a pencil where the eraser used to be. Much tidier. I measured a bunch of foam core board after checking the available space on the top of the stone carved XPS foam, which I had cut to a pretty random size. The floor plan almost ended up square, but I think I'll try different lengths of rectangles in my future builds. I used tacky glue and toothpicks to pin the structure together after failing to use the toothpicks to pin the walls straight to the XPS foam base. The toothpicks went into the foam at all crazy angles and risked tearing through the paper of the foam core board. No thanks. Many parts of this build were fiddly and time consuming, so a good audiobook helped out as I cut the craft sticks with scissors and used my eye and thumb to gauge how long and at what angles to cut them. I considered using some sandpaper to get the adjustments down to the micromillimeter, but the scissors were just faster, and it's fantasy terrain, so it's held up by magic and sheer force of the terrain maker's will anyway. I did try to measure out the beams a little, as I had some 3D printed resin parts of the window. I wanted to make sure they fit well. A large gap in the front wall panel had been cut to fit my 3D printed door, but when I attached this part, I forgot to turn the side with all my pen lines towards the inside of the building. This would haunt me until the end of the build. I assembled the roof by creating strips of fake tiles from the delivery box Amazon sent stuff to me in. I cut, peeled, sanded, and glued them together into sheets approximately the length of each side of my sloping roof. Then, I made a mess gluing 2 pieces of plastic card at an angle with some foam core as a bracer, cut to match the angle of my front and back walls. Eventually it worked, and I glued on my cardboard tiles. One side I airbrushed with the grey primer, and the other side I used a PVA water and cheap black acrylic paint mix to see which worked better. I didn't like the fluffy pits all over the cardboard on the airbrush side, so I lathered on some of the PVA mix there too. This made the cardboard puff up due to all the water in the mix. It needed some gentle patting down into places the mix dried. Mistake number 7,943 logged. I airbrushed a part of the roof with Vallejo medium yellow from the air range, hoping it would tie well into the washed infill stones, which had that dirty white colour. It didn't look great. Instead, I mixed some Vallejo Air Red into the yellow until it was a paler red and sprayed away. This gave the roof a crazy mottled look. I was spraying this red over a part that was yellow, over a part that was PVA and black, which was already over grey primer, and on the other side the pure PVA and black over cardboard. But like all terrain things, random variety makes for realism? Yes? No? Charging on, I made a very watery wash and tried to add some depth to the side of the wooden supports, and then took it outside to give it a satin gloss spray in preparation for some planned oil paint. So after making a mess, I abandoned my plans to cover the tops of the steps with wooden planks because my hobby knife had torn all the foam out in a very cranky way. Therefore, the grey primer didn't really get into all the gaps, and when I sprayed it with a rattle can, it wasn't the end of the world. It was only a little bit melty, so I proceeded by using thinned down oil paints in enamel thinner. This oil paint mix melted the back of the piece really bad. It made the grooves in the stairs even worse, and it made me feel like taking this whole piece and throwing it over the balcony and probably down onto the head of some poor suspecting person who was walking into the shop below. But reason prevailed, and I launched into the next technique I'd never tried: snow. We're reaching the end now, and the product I was using to take my tentative baby steps into snow effects was from Vallejo. Yes, I love Vallejo products. I pulled it around corners, along any surface it jutted out, including windowsills. I used it sparingly where something may have hung out over an area, such as under those same windowsills, in the hope of showing the snow in a more natural state. I dry brushed my roof with some white to highlight some of the tiles, and then dabbled the snow around the edges. On the top, I dry brushed a little bit more all over the model to tie in the snow, and that's where we are today. I have a few more of these that I want to make, including a longer one, a 2-story one, as well as this ruined one, which I've already started. I fumbled through this build, but I'm quite proud of the look that this has. I think it's pretty cute. In the end, I like it, especially this little fake window glow that I airbrushed in on a whim, just to make it look like someone's home. If you like the simple 3D printed parts that I made, I'll put some links to where you can get those below. I made them in Tinkercad and then just printed out on my Anycubic Photon Mini, the cheap one. So here are some pretty images of the house, and if you liked what I did here, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you can catch the next video. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down, tell me what was crap in the comments. See ya!